What would you do if the man you trusted with your life, the father of your child, turned his back on you when you needed him the most? Naomi was a loving wife, carrying her husband's child while battling sickness that left her weak and fragile. But instead of standing by her, Richard abandoned her for the one person Naomi thought she could always trust, her very own best friend. What Richard didn't know was that Naomi carried a secret bigger than any betrayal, a secret worth $200 million. This is not just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of betrayal, survival, and the kind of comeback that leaves the whole world stunned. Stay with me to the very end, because Naomi's journey will prove one thing. Sometimes, the people who try to break you are the very reason you rise stronger than ever. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss these powerful stories. Now, let's get into it. The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where life seemed almost like a fairy tale. Naomi Johnson, a radiant black woman in her late 20s, was known for her gentle smile and the kindness she extended to everyone she met. She had grown up with very little, yet her spirit was unshakable. People described her as the type of woman who carried light into every room she entered. And when she met Richard Hayes, it seemed as though her world was finally complete. Richard was handsome, ambitious, and wealthy. The son of a prominent businessman, he carried himself with an air of confidence that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He noticed Naomi not for her beauty alone, but for the warmth in her eyes, the calm in her voice, and the strength in her character. Their love story unfolded quickly. Romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and whispered promises of forever. Within a year, Richard had proposed, and Naomi believed she had found her happy ending. At the wedding, one guest in particular seemed to watch the bride with an intensity that went unnoticed by most. Clara, Naomi's childhood best friend. Clara was everything Naomi was not. Flashy, glamorous, and consumed with appearances. While Naomi's beauty came from her natural grace, Clara relied on expensive makeup, designer clothes, and her ability to draw attention. She smiled through the ceremony, hugged Naomi tightly, and whispered, "I'm so happy for you." But inside, jealousy festered. Naomi was starting a new life with a man Clara secretly coveted. Richard had money, power, and a charm Clara could never resist. Months passed, and Naomi's joy only grew when she discovered she was pregnant. Richard was overjoyed at first, showering her with affection, promising to give her and their unborn child the world. But as Naomi's pregnancy advanced, her health began to falter. The once energetic woman became tired, often sick, and in need of constant rest. Richard tried to be patient, but cracks slowly began to show in his perfect image of marriage. Clara, ever the opportunist, saw her chance. She would visit often, offering to help Naomi around the house. She brought meals, folded laundry, and even rubbed Naomi's swollen feet as if she were the most devoted friend in the world. But every stolen glance at Richard, every subtle compliment, every too-long laugh at his jokes was a thread in the trap she was weaving. Naomi never suspected a thing. To her, Clara was family, the sister she never had. One evening, as Naomi rested in the bedroom, Richard and Clara found themselves alone in the living room. The glow of the fireplace flickered across Clara's face as she leaned closer, her voice a low murmur. "You deserve more than this, Richard. She's not the same woman you married." Richard didn't respond, but the silence spoke volumes. Naomi's perfect beginning was already showing signs of unraveling, though she didn't yet know it. The early days of Naomi's pregnancy had been filled with joy and tender moments. Richard would place his hand gently on her belly, whispering to their unborn child, and Naomi would smile, believing their love could withstand anything. But as the months went by, the fairy tale began to fade. Naomi's health grew fragile. She was often bedridden, plagued with dizziness and fatigue. The doctors assured her that both she and the baby were safe, but it meant she had to slow down, rest, and depend heavily on others. Richard, once doting, began to withdraw. He grew impatient when Naomi struggled to get out of bed. He grew frustrated when she forgot small things, a glass of water here, a misplaced file there. To him, the vibrant woman he had married seemed to be vanishing before his eyes. And Clara was always there, ready to fill the void. She came by almost daily now. She helped Naomi cook, cleaned the house, and kept Richard company while Naomi slept. But beneath her acts of kindness was a deliberate game. Clara knew exactly how to present herself, lively, charming, and full of energy. She laughed at Richard's jokes, touched his arm just a little too long, and made subtle remarks that planted seeds of doubt. One evening, Naomi overheard something that made her heart skip. She had awoken from a nap and heard Richard's voice from the kitchen. "Sometimes I just feel like she's not the same. I married a woman full of life, and now she's just tired all the time." Clara's reply came smoothly, like silk laced with poison. "She's a wonderful woman, Richard. But maybe she's not giving you what you need anymore. A man like you deserve happiness too." Naomi froze at the doorway, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Her heart ached at Richard's words, but more than that, she felt the sting of betrayal in Clara's tone. When she entered the kitchen, both Richard and Clara straightened instantly. Naomi forced a smile, but deep down, unease had begun to grow. Still, she wanted to believe the best. She convinced herself that Clara was only trying to help, that Richard was just overwhelmed. But the truth was clear to everyone else. The cracks in Naomi's marriage were widening, and Clara was slipping right through them. At night, when Naomi lay in bed beside Richard, she would place her hand on his chest, longing for the closeness they once shared. But he would turn away, claiming exhaustion. The warmth was gone. Naomi prayed silently, hoping the arrival of their child would heal whatever distance had grown between them. She clung to hope, not realizing that Clara's shadow was already stretching across her marriage. The days blurred into weeks, and Naomi's condition worsened after her 7th month of pregnancy. She could barely walk without support, and her once bright smile had dimmed beneath the weight of exhaustion. But Clara glowed. She became the constant presence in the Hayes household, arriving early, staying late, always claiming she was there to help Naomi. She carried grocery bags into the kitchen, cooked meals, and folded baby clothes. To Naomi, it was loyalty. To Richard, it was temptation. One rainy evening, Richard returned home late from work. Naomi had already gone to bed, her body weak and her spirit heavy. Clara, however, was sitting in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, waiting. "You work too hard," Clara said softly, her eyes following him as he loosened his tie. Richard sighed, sinking into the couch across from her. "Someone has to. Naomi, she can't handle much these days." Clara tilted her head, a sly smile tugging at her lips. "She's lucky to have you. Most men wouldn't stay." The words hung in the air, dangerous, inviting. Richard looked away, but the seed was already planted. Over the next few weeks, their conversations grew bolder. Clara found reasons to brush against him when passing in the kitchen, to laugh at his smallest jokes, to linger close enough that her perfume filled his lungs. And Richard didn't push her away. One afternoon, Naomi woke earlier than expected from a nap. She padded softly down the hall, hearing faint laughter from the living room. When she peeked around the corner, her heart clenched. Clara's hand rested on Richard's knee, her body leaning dangerously close to his. Naomi froze. Richard noticed her instantly and pulled away, standing too quickly. "Naomi, you should be resting." Clara's face turned pink, but she smiled as though nothing had happened. "We were just talking about baby names." Naomi nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, her trust began to fracture. She wanted desperately to believe that what she saw was harmless, that her husband and her best friend couldn't possibly betray her. Yet the way Richard avoided her gaze, the way Clara's lips curved in secret satisfaction, told her otherwise. The betrayal was there, creeping in the shadows, even if Naomi didn't yet have the strength to confront it. And soon, it would no longer be hidden. The day Naomi gave birth should have been the happiest day of her life. The hospital room was filled with soft cries as her newborn daughter was placed gently in her arms. Tears streamed down Naomi's face as she kissed the baby's forehead. She whispered promises of love, of protection, of a future filled with warmth. But when she turned her head to share that moment with Richard, his expression wasn't joy. It was disappointment. Richard stood at the side of the bed, hands shoved into his pockets, barely glancing at the tiny life that had just entered the world. "She looks like you," Naomi said weakly, smiling through her exhaustion. Richard forced a nod, but his eyes drifted elsewhere. He muttered something about work, then left the room. Naomi's heart broke a little that day. The weeks that followed were harder still. Naomi's health had taken a dangerous dip after childbirth. The doctors warned her to rest, to take things slowly, but how could she? She had a newborn crying through the night, and a husband who had grown colder than ice. Richard no longer came home early. He avoided holding the baby, claiming he wasn't good with children. And when Naomi tried to lean on him for support, he recoiled. "You're always so weak now, Naomi," he snapped one evening. "You used to be strong, independent. Now all you do is complain and cry." Naomi's lips trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I just gave birth to your child, Richard. I need you." But instead of comforting her, Richard stormed out of the room. It wasn't long before Clara pressed her advantage. She began spending nights at Richard's side, whispering words Naomi had once heard in her own ears. She flattered him, stroked his ego, reminded him of the man he used to feel like before Naomi's illness and motherhood weighed him down. And one night, Richard made his choice. He packed a bag. Naomi woke to the sound of zippers and drawers closing. She sat up weakly, clutching her baby in her arms. "Richard, what are you doing?" He didn't look at her as he said it. "I can't do this anymore. You're not the woman I married. I need someone who makes me feel alive again." Naomi's breath caught. "You're leaving me? Leaving us? For Clara?" The silence was confirmation enough. Her sobs filled the room, but Richard walked out, closing the door behind him, abandoning his sick wife and his newborn daughter for the arms of her best friend. Naomi sat on the floor, rocking her baby, whispering through her tears. "It's okay, my love. Mama's here. I'll never leave you." She didn't know it yet, but life had a plan far greater than the betrayal she was enduring. After Richard's departure, the house felt colder than ever. The once lively home was now filled with silence, broken only by the cries of Naomi's newborn daughter. She was exhausted, weak, and heartbroken, but she clung fiercely to her baby, refusing to let despair consume her. The community whispered. Some pitied her, others judged her. She must have done something wrong, they said. Why else would her husband leave right after the baby? Naomi ignored them all. She focused on feeding her child, singing lullabies through the tears, and slowly regaining her strength. What no one knew, not even Richard, was that Naomi was far from helpless. Naomi's late grandmother, a woman who had lived humbly but wisely, had left her a fortune. Hidden beneath layers of legal trusts and investments was an inheritance worth $200 million. Her grandmother had always told her, "Wealth can be a blessing or a curse. Use it wisely, and never let greed dictate your life." Naomi had taken that lesson to heart. Even after inheriting the fortune, she continued to live modestly, never flaunting her wealth. Richard had married her believing she was just a sweet, ordinary woman, never once imagining the empire she quietly possessed. And now, as she sat cradling her baby, Naomi realized that this secret wealth was not just money. It was her second chance. She met with her grandmother's lawyers, unlocking the trusts that had been waiting for her. With careful guidance, Naomi began to invest, to build, and to create a future where she and her daughter would never need to depend on anyone again. Meanwhile, Richard and Clara flaunted their relationship across town. They dined in fancy restaurants, posted smiling pictures on social media, and acted as though they had won. But what Richard didn't know was that while he was chasing shallow pleasures, Naomi was quietly rising. Within a year, she had purchased a stunning new home. She began donating to hospitals and charities that supported single mothers. Her name started appearing in local newspapers: Naomi Johnson, philanthropist and entrepreneur. And as her influence grew, so did her confidence. For the first time in months, she looked in the mirror and saw not a broken woman, but a survivor. A mother. A woman who had been betrayed, but not destroyed. Her baby's laughter filled the halls of their new home, a daily reminder that she had everything she truly needed. Richard had abandoned her, but Naomi was discovering something far greater than his love. She was discovering her power. And soon, the world, including Richard and Clara, would see it too. The transformation did not happen overnight, but slowly, steadily, Naomi rebuilt herself. Her mornings, once heavy with exhaustion and heartbreak, became filled with purpose. She rose early to feed her baby, then spent hours with financial advisors, planning carefully how to grow her inheritance into something lasting. The quiet woman Richard abandoned was gone. In her place stood Naomi Johnson, confident, composed, and driven. She bought a breathtaking estate on the edge of the city, a house with wide glass windows, manicured gardens, and a nursery fit for a princess. It wasn't to show off. It was to build a haven, a safe place where her daughter would never know the sting of abandonment. She invested in businesses that created jobs for women. She launched scholarships for young mothers trying to finish school. Slowly, her name became associated with generosity and strength. The community that once whispered about her began to admire her. Newspapers called her a rising star in philanthropy. Invitations poured in for charity events, galas, and fundraisers. And whenever Naomi walked into a room, heads turned. She was no longer the fragile woman betrayed by her husband. She was the woman who had risen from the ashes, holding her child on one arm and her legacy in the other. Meanwhile, Richard and Clara's picture-perfect romance began to unravel. At first, Clara relished her new life. She wore expensive dresses Richard bought on credit, posted endless selfies of their perfect love, and paraded herself as the woman who had won. But winning came with a price. Richard's business ventures, once promising, began to collapse. Without Naomi's quiet stability, his reckless spending and poor decisions caught up to him. Deals fell through, debts piled up, and soon the money he flaunted with Clara wasn't enough. Arguments began to erupt in their home. Clara accused him of being irresponsible. Richard accused her of being demanding. The glamorous love affair turned bitter, loud, and desperate. And then came the ultimate sting. At a charity event one evening, Richard and Clara walked into the ballroom, only to see Naomi standing at the center of it all. She wore a deep emerald gown, her natural beauty radiant, her smile unshaken. Powerful men and women surrounded her, eager for her attention, her respect, her approval. Clara's jaw dropped. Richard froze. Naomi, once the woman they mocked, pitied, and abandoned, was now untouchable. Their eyes met across the room. Naomi gave a polite nod, nothing more, then turned back to her conversation with the senator's wife. That night, Clara hissed at Richard in the car, "You never told me she had money." Richard clenched his fists, his face pale. "I didn't know." And for the first time, Clara realized she had betrayed her best friend for a man who was crumbling, while Naomi had become everything they could never be. Life has a way of evening the scales. For Richard and Clara, the glitter of their affair began to fade faster than either of them expected. Richard's businesses collapsed one after another. The investors who once trusted him pulled out. Debts piled up. Creditors knocked at his door. The expensive cars and lavish dinners that had once impressed Clara were sold off piece by piece. Clara, who had betrayed her best friend for the promise of luxury, found herself living in a cramped apartment with a man who was no longer charming, no longer wealthy, and no longer desirable. Their arguments turned violent in tone, shouting matches that neighbors whispered about. Clara accused Richard of ruining her life. Richard accused Clara of being ungrateful. But beneath it all was a bitter truth. They both knew they had destroyed themselves. Meanwhile, Naomi's star only rose higher. Her face appeared on magazine covers. The philanthropist mother. From heartbreak to hope. She was admired for her resilience, her generosity, and her refusal to let bitterness define her. And yet, despite her grace, Richard still thought he could worm his way back into her life. One late evening, as Naomi returned home from a charity gala, she found Richard waiting outside her gates. His suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow. "Naomi, please," he begged, his voice shaking. "I made a mistake. Clara, she's not who I thought she was. But you've always been the one. For the sake of our child, give me another chance." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. In another lifetime, she might have wept at his words, clung to him, begged him to stay. But not anymore. Her voice was calm, steady, and resolute. "You didn't just leave me, Richard. You left our daughter. And a man who can walk away from his own child doesn't deserve a place in her life, or mine." Richard's face crumpled, but Naomi stepped past him, the gates closing firmly behind her. Inside, she whispered to her daughter, "We don't need him. We never did." Across town, Clara sat alone, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror. The glamorous woman who once strutted around in diamonds was gone. In her place was a bitter, aging woman filled with regret. She realized too late that in chasing envy, she had lost the one person who had ever truly loved her as a friend. Naomi. Karma had found them both, stripping them of the wealth, the happiness, and the love they had stolen. And Naomi was untouched, stronger than ever. The night of the charity gala was one Naomi would never forget. The grand ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, golden light cascading across polished marble floors. Influential figures, CEOs, politicians, celebrities, filled the room, eager to support Naomi's foundation for single mothers. She arrived in a gown of midnight blue silk, her natural curls framing her face like a crown. The cameras flashed as she stepped onto the red carpet, her baby daughter's picture pinned proudly to a diamond locket around her neck. Naomi was no longer the woman abandoned and humiliated. She was a woman who had rebuilt her life, and the world admired her for it. But across the ballroom, two unwelcome faces appeared. Richard and Clara had come, desperate for relevance. Their clothes, though once expensive, were worn. Their smiles were strained. They clutched each other's arms, hoping no one would notice how far they had fallen. But people noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Naomi's ex-husband and ex-best friend entered. Some gasped, others chuckled quietly. Everyone knew the story. Everyone knew who had won. Richard's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Naomi. His breath caught. She was radiant, glowing with success, confidence, and peace. Clara's nails dug into his arm, jealousy burning her from the inside. When Naomi took the stage, the room fell silent. She spoke with grace, her voice steady, filled with warmth. I stand here not because life has been easy, but because I refuse to let betrayal define me. To every mother who feels abandoned, to every woman who feels broken, know that your story doesn't end there. You are stronger than the pain, stronger than the lies, and worthy of every blessing life still holds. The audience erupted in applause. Richard and Clara sat in the corner, faces burning with shame. They had come expecting to confront her, maybe even beg for forgiveness, but Naomi gave them nothing. Not anger. Not acknowledgement. Not even a glance. She didn't need revenge. Her success was revenge enough. By the end of the evening, Naomi's name was on everyone's lips. Investors lined up to support her foundation. Reporters praised her resilience. Strangers offered their admiration. And Richard and Clara slipped out quietly, humiliated, their presence unnoticed, their downfall complete. Outside, Clara hissed at him, "You promised me a better life." Richard snapped back, "And you promised me happiness." But as they stood there in the cold night air, it was clear they had destroyed their futures chasing something they could never have. Naomi had risen above them, untouchable. The morning sun spilled through Naomi's penthouse windows, painting the room in soft golden light. She sat by the window with her daughter, cradling the little girl in her arms. The baby giggled, reaching for the locket around Naomi's neck, the one holding her picture. Naomi kissed her daughter's tiny hands, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. It hadn't been an easy journey. There were nights she thought she wouldn't make it. Days when loneliness crushed her chest. Times when betrayal threatened to consume her. But every time she looked at her baby, she remembered why she had to keep going. Her daughter wasn't just her child. She was her reason. Naomi whispered softly, "You saved me, little one. You gave me strength when I had none left." The phone buzzed on the table. A message from her foundation team came in. "We've just reached $10 million in donations. The world is with you." Naomi smiled. Not because of the money, but because she knew the impact it would make. Women who once felt invisible would now have shelter, education, and opportunities. Mothers who had been abandoned would know they weren't alone. She had turned her pain into purpose. Her daughter yawned, resting her head against Naomi's chest. In that quiet moment, Naomi realized something profound. Richard and Clara had taken nothing from her. They had only freed her to become the woman she was always meant to be. Wealth was a blessing, yes. Success was sweet. But the real victory was love, the love she shared with her child, pure and unshakable. Naomi stood and walked to the balcony, holding her daughter close. Below, The city pulsed with life. Somewhere in that same city, Richard and Clara were living with regret, their love poisoned by lies. But here, high above it all, Naomi breathed freely. She pressed her cheek against her baby's soft curls and whispered, "Our story doesn't end with betrayal. It begins with us. And together, we will write something beautiful." The wind swept through her hair, the sunlight kissed her skin, and for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt whole. Her greatest triumph wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't the foundation. It wasn't even the applause of the world. It was this, being a mother. And in that role, she had everything. And so, Naomi's story reminds us of something powerful. Sometimes the deepest betrayals are not the end of us. They are the beginning of something greater. Richard thought he was walking away with love. Clara thought she was walking away with victory. But in truth, they walked straight into emptiness. Naomi, the woman they left behind, rose from the ashes with grace, with strength, and with an inheritance not just of money, but of wisdom, resilience, and love. Her $200 million fortune became more than wealth. It became a weapon for healing, a shield for the broken, and a reminder that no one can take away the destiny written for you. At the heart of it all, Naomi proved that being a mother, a protector, and a fighter was her greatest triumph. What do you think, my friends? Did Richard and Clara deserve what life gave them? Or was Naomi's revenge simply living well? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story touched you, please don't forget to like this video,